Melania Trump came ready to attack Jasmine Crockett's values, her family, and her integrity. But Jasmine stood unshaken, and what happened next left even the First Lady searching for words. The stage was bright. Cameras rolled. The audience hushed into silence. Everyone inside the studio knew this was not going to be an ordinary broadcast. The producers had brought together two women who could not be more different, and sparks were almost guaranteed. On one side of the stage sat Melania Trump, the First Lady of the United States. Her presence was undeniable. Her posture straight, her expression calm, her every movement polished. She looked every bit like a woman who was used to the spotlight. Being the wife of President Donald Trump, she carried with her the weight of status, the confidence of position, and the quiet authority that came with being part of the most powerful office in the country. Across from her sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. If Melania's strength was silence and elegance, Jasmine's was fire and grit. Known for her fearless words and sharp wit, Jasmine had built a reputation for being someone who could hold her own no matter who was in front of her. Her eyes locked forward, her body language calm but alert, like a boxer sitting in the corner of the ring, waiting for the bell to ring. The setup itself was electric. Two women from completely different worlds sharing the same stage, both carrying influence, both commanding attention. For the audience, this was more than a political debate. This was theater. The tension could almost be felt in the air. Viewers at home leaned forward. Those in the studio shifted in their seats, sensing that the polite smiles on stage were just a mask for what was about to happen. The moderator began with simple questions. Both women answered with poise, each trying to win the audience without showing too much of their hand. But the calmness was thin. You could see it in the way Jasmine's eyes narrowed slightly at Melania's polished phrases. You could see it in the way Melania's lips curved into a small practiced smile whenever Jasmine spoke. It was as if both were waiting for the right moment to strike. Every live show has its rhythm. Sometimes it takes time for energy to build. But this one, it was different. From the very beginning, there was a sense that something unexpected was about to happen. The audience didn't know it yet, but in less than an hour they would witness a moment that would leave them speechless. A moment where one woman tried to humiliate the other, only to find herself completely silenced in return, and the suspense was thick. Melania Trump adjusted her microphone, her eyes sweeping across the audience. She spoke in that familiar, calm tone, the kind that made it seem like she was always in control. Jasmine Crockett listened quietly, her face revealing nothing but her mind racing, preparing. It was the kind of setup that felt almost like a scene in a movie. Two powerful figures on stage, lights glaring down, the crowd hanging on every word. The calm before the storm is often the most dangerous part because it tricks you into thinking nothing will happen. But storms always come. And in this room, in front of millions of viewers, the storm was brewing faster than anyone realized. The opening exchanges between Melania Trump and Jasmine Crockett had been polite enough. But everyone watching knew it wouldn't stay that way for long. The tension wasn't just hanging in the room. It was pulsing, rising like pressure building inside a shaken soda can. And then it happened. Melania Trump, sitting tall in her chair, shifted her body slightly toward Jasmine. Her eyes narrowed, her chin tilted upward. It was subtle, but everyone watching could feel it. The moment she decided it was time to strike. Her words came out smooth at first, almost casual, but the sharp edges were impossible to miss. She started with a small jab, a remark that questioned Jasmine's political values, the kind of comment that could be brushed off as harmless if you weren't paying close attention. But then Melania pressed further. She questioned Jasmine's reputation, casting doubt on whether she truly lived by the principles she often spoke about. She slid in comments about Jasmine's family, phrases carefully chosen to sting, but delivered in a way that sounded almost polished. Each remark carried a double meaning. On the surface, it was conversation. Beneath it, it was an attempt to wound. The room grew quiet. People could feel the shift. This wasn't a debate anymore. It was a personal attack live in front of millions of eyes. Melania's tone stayed calm, but her intent was clear. She wasn't trying to have an honest discussion. She was trying to put Jasmine on the defensive to make her look small. Every word was like a chess move designed to trap her opponent into fumbling. Jasmine sat still. She didn't interrupt. She didn't even raise an eyebrow. And that silence made the moment feel even heavier. The audience glanced from one woman to the other, unsure of what would happen next. Would Jasmine lash out? Would she crumble under the weight of the insults? The tension stretched longer with each word, Melania added. Melania leaned forward slightly, her voice dipping lower, her smile faint but cutting. This wasn't the polite First Lady making a simple observation. This was someone throwing daggers with her words, hoping to score a clean hit. The insults became more pointed. She implied Jasmine wasn't as credible as she claimed. She hinted that Jasmine's family life was messy, that her background made her unfit to stand at the same level as the First Lady of the United States. And she did it all with a tone of dismissal, like she was brushing off an inconvenience. The message was clear. I am above you. Every second felt longer than the last. The audience shifted uneasily in their seats. Some gasped softly, realizing just how personal the attack had become. Others stayed frozen, waiting to see how Jasmine would respond. But Jasmine didn't flinch. Her stillness almost made the moment more intense. It was as if she were giving Melania all the room she needed to walk further and further into a trap she didn't know existed. The atmosphere in the studio was heavy now, almost suffocating. Melania's words hung in the air like smoke, and everyone could feel that the confrontation was reaching its peak. The cameras zoomed in, capturing every flicker of expression. Melania, convinced she had gained the upper hand, adjusted her jacket slightly and leaned back in her chair with the look of someone who believed she had won. But what she didn't realize, what no one realized just yet, was that Jasmine Crockett was sitting quietly waiting for the perfect moment. And in less than a minute, the silence she was holding on to would break. And when it broke, it wouldn't just shift the room, it would shatter it. The words from Melania Trump still lingered in the air, like smoke after a firecracker. The audience shifted nervously, some whispering to their neighbors, others frozen in disbelief at just how personal her comments had become. And yet Jasmine Crockett didn't move. She sat there perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes locked forward. Not a smile, not a frown, just calm, steady silence. The clock ticked. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. 15. The air in the studio grew heavier with each passing moment. People expected her to snap back instantly. They expected raised voices, angry words, maybe even shouting. That's what usually happens when one person is pushed so far. But Jasmine was different. She didn't give Melania the satisfaction of a quick reaction. Instead, she waited 20 seconds, 30 seconds. By now, the camera zoomed in tight on her face, trying to capture even the smallest flicker of emotion. But she gave them nothing. Just composure, just calm. The audience leaned forward, holding their breath. Even the moderator, who had tried to stay neutral all evening, looked uneasy. Was Jasmine frozen? Was she deciding whether to walk off stage? No one knew. And then, after 41 long, unforgettable seconds, Jasmine Crockett finally leaned toward her microphone. Her voice was steady, measured, almost too calm for what she was about to say. She looked directly at Melania Trump and delivered a single line that sliced through the silence like a blade. Barron is not your son, and everyone knows who his mother is. The reaction was immediate. Gasps rippled across the studio. Some covered their mouths in shock. Others shook their heads, whispering in disbelief. The entire atmosphere flipped in an instant. And Melania, her face told the story. The confidence she had worn just moments before drained away. Her eyes flickered, her lips tightened, and that practiced calm she had displayed all evening vanished. The smirk was gone. What made Jasmine's response so powerful wasn't just the words themselves. It was everything that came before them. The silence, the patience, the deliberate pause that stretched on until everyone was waiting, desperate to hear what she would say. And when she finally spoke, she didn't shout. She didn't slam the table or raise her voice. She didn't need to. The power came from her calmness, from the weight of her words, from the precision of her timing. It was a masterclass in control. The line was more than just a comeback. It was a direct hit aimed at the very heart of Melania's carefully guarded public image. Jasmine had taken Melania's attempt to humiliate her and flipped it into a statement that turned the entire room against the First Lady. The audience sat stunned. No one clapped. No one cheered. They just sat in silence, absorbing what had just happened. It was one of those rare moments where time itself seemed to slow down. Jasmine leaned back in her chair, her composure unshaken, her expression unreadable. She had said her piece. She didn't need to add anything more. The silence that followed her words was louder than any applause could have been. Melania shifted uncomfortably, her hands fidgeting slightly. For the first time during the event, she looked unsettled. She had walked onto that stage expecting to dominate, to humiliate, to come out on top. But in less than a minute, Jasmine had stripped all of that away. The audience knew they had just witnessed something unforgettable. They had seen a clash that went beyond politics, beyond simple disagreements. This was personal. This was raw. And Jasmine Crockett had turned it into a moment of undeniable power. As the cameras lingered on both women, the difference was clear. Melania looked smaller, shaken, her usual calm slipping through her fingers. Jasmine looked steady, unshaken, almost serene, as if she had planned the moment all along. That single sentence had changed everything. The balance of power had shifted. The narrative had flipped, and the First Lady of the United States had been silenced. Not by shouting, not by force, but by the quiet strength of a woman who refused to be humiliated. For those watching at home, it was a lesson in patience, in timing, in the art of saying less but meaning more. 41 seconds of silence, one sentence, and the room would never be the same again. The silence after Jasmine Crockett's words stretched across the room like a heavy curtain. The sentence still echoed. "Barron is not your son, and everyone knows who his mother is." You could see it written across every face in the audience. Shock, disbelief, curiosity. People sat frozen in their seats, trying to process what they had just heard. And at the center of it all was Melania Trump. The First Lady had started the evening with poise, grace, and control. But now her calm exterior cracked. She shifted in her chair, her hands fidgeted, and for the first time, her polished mask slipped. But Melania wasn't about to surrender. No, her instinct was to regain control, to reassert her dominance in the room. She straightened her back, adjusted her microphone, and with a forced smile began to speak. Her voice carried its usual softness, but underneath it was a clear tremor. She denied Jasmine's words instantly, shaking her head as though the very suggestion was absurd. She tried to laugh it off, a chuckle here, a dismissive wave there, as if Jasmine's remark was beneath her attention, but the audience wasn't buying it. Every word Melania spoke seemed weaker than the last. The calm authority she had wielded earlier was gone. Now she sounded defensive, almost desperate. She tried to change the subject to pivot back to safer ground, but the sting of Jasmine's remark lingered too strongly in the room. Her eyes darted from the audience to the cameras and back again. She tried to keep smiling, but it looked strained. The more she spoke, the more obvious it became. She wasn't in control anymore. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett sat silently, her body language steady, her expression calm. She didn't need to interrupt. She didn't need to add a single word. Her silence was louder than Melania's denials. The contrast was striking. On one side, a First Lady scrambling to recover, speaking in circles, trying to pull the room back into her hands. On the other, a Congresswoman who had already won the exchange, sitting in unshakable calm. And then Jasmine decided to speak again. This time, her voice wasn't sharp or cutting. It was steady, measured, carrying the weight of someone who knew the audience was hanging on every word. She didn't go back to Melania's personal life. She didn't throw another dagger. Instead, she lifted the conversation higher. She turned away from Melania, looking directly into the cameras, speaking not to the First Lady, but to the people watching at home. Her words shifted the energy in the room. She spoke about unity. She spoke about truth. She spoke about integrity, about how leaders should hold themselves accountable, about how power should never be used to humiliate or belittle. The audience, still reeling from the clash moments earlier, now leaned into her words. She wasn't just defending herself anymore. She was speaking for the nation, and that's where Jasmine's true triumph lay. She could have stayed locked in a battle with Melania, trading insults until the show descended into chaos. But she didn't. She took the moment Melania had handed her and she turned it into a platform for something greater. It was no longer about Melania versus Jasmine. It was about respect. It was about dignity. It was about what America should expect from its leaders. Melania tried to interrupt once or twice, but her attempts fell flat. The room was no longer with her. The energy had shifted completely. Every eye was on Jasmine. Every ear was tuned to her voice. By the time Jasmine finished, there was no doubt left. She had won. Not just the argument, not just the moment. She had won the respect of the room, the attention of the cameras, and the admiration of those watching at home. Melania, the First Lady of the United States, had walked in expecting to dominate. But instead, she sat in silence, her earlier attempt to humiliate Jasmine blown back in her face. And Jasmine Crockett. She didn't just survive the attack, she rose above it. She showed that strength isn't found in titles or in status, but in composure, timing, and the courage to speak truth when it matters most. The crowd remained hushed as Jasmine leaned back, her point made, her victory clear. The moderator, sensing the weight of the moment, struggled to bring the conversation back to safer ground, but it was too late. The stage had already been claimed. Melania's words would be forgotten. Jasmine's would not. In the end, what people would remember wasn't the insult, wasn't the denial. It was the calm strength of a woman who refused to be humiliated and who turned a moment of conflict into a message for the entire country. And that message was simple. True power isn't in tearing others down. It's in standing tall and lifting the truth higher than the noise around you. The stage lights dimmed slightly, but the tension in the air still burned bright. What had started as a heated exchange between two women had transformed into something much bigger. The First Lady of the United States, Melania Trump, sat silent, her earlier composure shaken, and across from her sat Jasmine Crockett, calm, steady, victorious. Everyone in that room knew it. The balance had shifted, the aftershock. The crowd sat frozen for a moment, caught between disbelief and awe. They had just watched Jasmine Crockett dismantle an attack that was meant to humiliate her. But instead of folding under the weight of Melania's sharp words, Jasmine had turned the tables with patience, precision, and a single cutting line. Now the energy in the room was no longer tense. It was electric. It was the kind of silence that demanded attention, the kind that forced people to stop, think, and feel. Melania's attempts to deny and distract hung awkwardly in the air. Her polished mask had cracked, and no matter how many times she tried to reset the moment, her words slipped through her fingers like sand. But Jasmine didn't rush to fill the silence. She sat still, letting the weight of the confrontation hang there, letting everyone reflect on what had just happened, turning the spotlight. And then, slowly, Jasmine leaned toward her microphone once again. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was clear, calm, measured. She didn't look at Melania anymore. She looked directly into the cameras, her gaze steady, her tone carrying a new kind of authority. "This moment," she began, "is not just about me or the First Lady. It's about what kind of country we want to be." The words cut through the room like a steady drumbeat. She was no longer just answering an insult. She was lifting the conversation higher, far above the clash of two personalities. Jasmine spoke about truth. She spoke about respect. She reminded everyone watching that leadership isn't about tearing people down, but about lifting others up. And then she made it personal. Not about herself, not about Melania, but about the people watching at home. You deserve leaders who don't hide behind titles. You deserve leaders who respect you enough to tell you the truth, even when it's hard. That is what integrity means. That is what unity means. And that is what America deserves. Her words were calm, but they carried weight. The audience leaned in, listening, hanging on each syllable. Melania's silence. Melania tried to interrupt once, twice, but each time her voice was met with silence from the crowd. The power in the room had shifted, and no amount of denial could change that. The First Lady of the United States, who had entered the stage with confidence and control, now sat quietly, her presence overshadowed by the Congresswoman across from her, and that silence spoke louder than anything she could have said. The bigger picture, Jasmine didn't gloat. She didn't rub salt into the wound. Instead, she lifted the conversation to the bigger picture. She reminded viewers that politics wasn't about personalities. It was about values. It was about the truth. She urged people to hold their leaders accountable, to demand honesty, to never be distracted by insults or shallow attacks. Her message was simple but powerful. The real strength of a nation lies not in tearing each other apart, but in standing together for what is right. And with that, Jasmine had transformed the night. What could have been remembered as a messy confrontation would now be remembered as a moment of clarity, a moment where truth and composure stood taller than status and power. The final word. As the moderator struggled to move the event forward, Jasmine leaned back in her chair, calm and collected, her point made. But before the cameras cut away, she delivered one last line, not to Melania, not to the moderator, but to the nation. America, you've seen the truth for yourself tonight. The question is simple. Who do you believe stood for you? It wasn't just a question. It was a challenge, a call for reflection, a call to decide what kind of leaders people wanted to follow. The lasting impact. The audience sat in silence again. But this time it wasn't shock. It was respect. When the applause finally came, it wasn't wild or chaotic. It was steady, deliberate, building with strength. The moment belonged to Jasmine Crockett. And long after the camera stopped rolling, long after the studio lights dimmed and the chairs were cleared, one thing was certain. People would not forget what they had witnessed. They had seen more than an argument. They had seen a battle of values. They had seen truth stand taller than power. And in the end, Jasmine Crockett had not only won the exchange, she had left a message echoing across the country. True power isn't in silencing others. True power is in standing calm, standing strong, and speaking truth when it matters most.